All right, so as we wrap up the Great Depression here, just get into the last little part. Really, this doesn't fall neatly into the Great Depression. This is something that we are going to, this is an idea we're going to look at that covers all of American history, but there's a big change in the American party system in United States history during the Great Depression. So, little review. We've talked about these in class before. The United States has gone through, and we are currently in our sixth party system. Okay, so just a little bit of review on how we get there and how this sets up. Okay, there's the first party system, 1788 to 1824. So we can't have these parties until we create the Constitution of the United States and start using it. That happens in 1788. And remember, good old George Washington is president from 1788 to 1796. 1796 to 1800 is John Adams, right? And then we get into T. Jeff, Madison, Monroe, all those good old Virginia boys. Okay, now in the first party system, we can't count the Feds and the Anti-Federalists as real parties. Remember, those are temporary factions that were there to get the Constitution passed as is or with amendments. So the first true political parties are the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Federalists want a strong federal government. They want to support the business class. They get their support from the well-educated and urban populations, and they eventually die out because they didn't support the War of 1812. The Democratic Republicans want more of a strong state government setup. They get a lot of their support in rural America and with farmers. It's also during this first party system that we saw the era of good feelings. That was from 1816 to 1824, where the Federalists really weren't around. It was just Democratic Republicans, so there was no loyal opposition. There was no second party. However, we know, if you remember back to this, we know that after the Panic of 1819, the Democratic Republicans began to split. So there really were two parties. All right. This brings us into the second party system, 1824 to 1854. You've got the Democrats versus the Whigs. Okay, the Democrats, remember, they're like the party of Jackson. Think of good old Andrew Jackson at this time. They're going to oppose banks. They're going to oppose the tariff. They're going to be more states' rights oriented. They're going to get their support from Southerners and Westerners and farmers and the working class. All right. Then you've got the Whigs. The Whigs are embodied by Henry Clay, right, and his American system. They want a bank to help regulate the economy. They're pro-tariff, pro-internal improvements. They're also kind of strangely anti-immigrant. They're big on the power of the federal government, and they're big on the power of Congress within the federal government. The Democrats kind of like the power of the president more in the federal government at this time. The Whigs like the power of Congress. They're going to get a lot of support from New England, the upper Midwest, the middle class, and the urban elite. Right? We also did see some third parties during this time, like the Know-Nothings. I know nothing except I don't want any more Catholic immigration. And those third parties are springing up because we aren't handling slavery well enough, and the political parties aren't addressing it. Then you get the third party system. This, you can see, comes with the birth of the Republican Party in 1854 and the death of the Whigs. So now in the third party system, you've got a lot going on here because it's just such a huge time of change in American history. We're leading up to the Civil War, then Reconstruction, then the Gilded Age, then the end of the Gilded Age, right? There's a lot going on during this time period. So for the Democrats, they're going to be more small government, more states' rights, more anti-civil rights. You know, for a time, Southern Democrats were pro-slavery, right? They were, for a time, anti-Reconstruction. They wanted to see things done more locally. They wanted soft money. They tried to support farmers. But the Democrats also struggled during this time period with Northern versus Southern Democrats. And after the Civil War, really the Democrats are more of a sectional power than anything else. They're really just confined to the South. You don't see a lot of broad, large support for Democrats outside of the South because of groups like the Populists. Remember the Populists and the Grangers? They took a lot of the farm votes that Democrats could have gotten in other areas. All right. Then for the Republicans at this time, you know, again, with the Civil War, some things change. They start out anti-expansion of slavery, then they become anti-slavery, then they become pro-civil rights for freedmen after the war. The entire time, they are pro-internal improvements, pro-tariff, pro-business class. The Republicans get a lot of support in the Midwest, the Northeast, the West, some farmers, and again, a lot from the business class as well. Right? But there's just like so many changes during this time period. that the parties changed a lot too, and we see the populists rising up at this time and then dying off really quickly. So again, an important third party. The fourth party system is what ends with the election of FDR. So this is where everyone's kind of a progressive. Remember, both Republicans and Democrats called themselves progressives at this time. We've got the end of the Gilded Age, we've got the age of American imperialism, we've got the progressive era, we've got the Roaring Twenties, we've got the start of the Great Depression, all happening during this time period. Okay, so with the progressive era, it's a very centralist time period where from about 1896 to about 1920, the political parties looked pretty similar. They want to use the power of the government to make reforms, not revolution, reforms to make the system work better by increasing voting and removing corruption. Right? There were some people who were for imperialism, some people against imperialism, but those people came from both sides of the aisle. So in the progressive era, everyone was pretty centralized. Now, when you start to look at 1920, 1932 and just some underlying ideas, Republicans, antitrust, pro-labor, Democrats, more pro-farmer and more pro-business. Those are a couple of the small things you could see there in the Democrats and the Republicans at that time period. But again, like they all liked some of the same stuff, right? It was centrist politics. They wanted reform. They wanted to remove corruption. They wanted more voter participation. Just about everybody supported the 19th Amendment. Everyone supported the reforms. Honestly, everyone even supported immigration restrictions at this time. So it's a pretty centralist time period. Just the Republicans are more antitrust, more labor. The Democrats are more farmer, more big biz. Okay? Now, the big change during the Great Depression, why we're talking about this right now, is the fifth party system starts during the Great Depression and lasts until 1968 with the election of Richard Nixon. Richard Milhous Nixon. All right? Now, this is when we start to get the New Deal coalition. The New Deal coalition of Democrats. The New Deals in the election of FDR changes the base of support. Okay? So now Democrats are going to get support from the urban middle class. They've had that for a while. They're going to get support from the youth. They're going to get support from farmers and the working class. The new group they get is minorities, specifically African Americans. African Americans had always voted for the party of Lincoln. They had always voted Republican up until 1932, but FDR employed record numbers of African Americans. Eleanor Roosevelt fought for African American equality, and many New Deal programs benefited the African American community. So now African Americans and other minority groups like Native Americans and Mexican Americans who are voting are going to support the Democrats, and that's the New Deal coalition. So the New Deal coalition, you're going to have minorities, the working class, farmers, and middle class Americans, especially in urban America, supporting the Democrats. They're going to be the party of big government. They're going to be the party of minority protections. They're going to be the party of more regulation of society and ties with labor and unions. So all of a sudden the Democrats have this enormous base. And then for the Republicans, they're going to be white America, honestly, rural America, and eventually, right at the end of the fifth party system, the South is going to start to flip from Democrat to Republican. There was kind of a weird mix where up until about 1964 and 1968, white Southerners voted Democrat because, again, they could never vote Republican because it was the party of Lincoln, and they called themselves Dixiecrats. So you had this New Deal coalition of Democrats that were like all the Democrats outside of the South, and then you had the Dixiecrat Southern Democrats who were like pro-segregation, pro-racist America that voted for these very specific type of white Democratic candidates. They're going to flip in 1968 and go to the Republican Party at the end. So the Republicans, again, white America, rural America, they'll start to get the South at the end. They were also kind of older America is where they got a lot of their support as well. So lots of shifts there. The big shift really that we're seeing with the fifth party system is who's supporting the Democratic Party. All right. Now, the sixth party system starts in 1968 with the election of Richard Nixon. This is when we start to really get into what we would consider liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans. All right. This is really how we still operate today. So, like, liberal Democrats are going to get their support in more urban America with minorities and with some working class groups. Conservative Republicans are going to get more of their support from rural America, from white America, from older America. And, there's all kinds of things that go along then with their platforms, right? And their platforms have changed a lot since 1968 until today, right? But in general, liberal Democrats are more, again, minority focused, regulation focused, big government focused. Conservative Republicans are more preservation of American morals and standards focused. Again, remember, we've talked before about the classical political science definition of conservative. You're trying to keep things the same or revert back to a previous state, right? That says a lot right there. And they're more the party of business, instead of like the minorities and the little guy, right? So those are just some general kind of assumptions we can make there. So the Great Depression sees that big change in New Deal Democrats and the New Deal coalition. And then it's the election of Nixon in 1968 up until today, where we see more of the liberal versus conservative side of things. Up until that point, you could say that Democrats and Republicans really operated on both ends. At times, the Democratic Party of the United States was liberal. At times, the Democratic Party of the United States was very conservative, and same with the Republican Party, right? So there's lots of movements, there's lots of flip-flopping and changes that you can see in who's supporting who and what party is in power, but a lot changes with the Great Depression. All right, so that's why I wanted to wrap the Great Depression up with this little talk about the party system in the United States. So we're currently in the 6-party system, and who knows, maybe we're getting ready for the 7th party system. All right, when you start to look at these changes, right, we typically get a new party system every 40 years or so. So who knows? Maybe it's time for the 7th party system. But that only time will tell, ladies. Only time will tell. So hop over, take that quiz. Great job today. Next time we get together, we'll talk about World War II. Have a good one. Hope all is well. Adios.